All right, my clock says 10 a.m. Pacific, so I think we can get rolling. Appreciate everybody joining us. Good morning and/or afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's KAMIND webinar, What's New in Microsoft Fiscal Year 2024. My name's Mike Klass, and I'm an account manager here at KAMIND IT. Before we get rolling today, a couple of housekeeping items. There will be time for Q&A at the end. So if you can keep your microphone on mute during the presentation, that would be excellent. With many of us still working from home, we'd like to eliminate all background distraction noises. If you have any questions mid-presentation, please feel free to use the chat functionality or the raise hand icon, and we'll be sure to weave your questions into the presentation best we can. We are recording today's webinar, so if you're uncomfortable with this, now would be your opportunity to opt out. Now with that out of the way, let's get down to business. So I'd like to preface today's webinar a little bit for you. Microsoft's fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th. So they just started their new 2024 fiscal year a couple weeks ago. Each year, mid-July, Microsoft has a partner-only event called Inspire. And what they do is they showcase all their new technologies coming out over the next 12 months. So Inspire actually happened last week. So all of today's information is still hot off the press for you. You'll also notice a very strong theme this year, AI or artificial intelligence. So with that said, please sit back and relax, and let's hear our President and CEO, Mr. Matt Katzer, talk to us today about what's new in Microsoft fiscal year 2024. Please take it away, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Mike, and welcome everyone. Yeah, this was really fun trying to put this together, looking at what the changes are and everything, all the other changes that Microsoft has. Like one of the changes for partners, Microsoft renamed the partner program. It used to be Microsoft Partner Network. Now it's Microsoft AI Cloud Partner Program, to give you an idea of what the intent is. Microsoft is moving literally everything into the cloud and integrating AI functionality. So it's really, there's going to be a lot of changes. It's going to change all our businesses. Doesn't matter which market you're in, if you're basically in terms of using Microsoft products, it's going to affect how we do things, how we actually look supply chain, how we look for sales, how we actually look for customer financial records, how do we actually just kind of do our day-to-day business. I mean, there's going to be a lot of changes, and it's going to be it's kind of exciting to see what's going on and see the change that we actually have. For those who don't know KAMIND, just from a standpoint, we're the Inc. 5000 fifth year running. So it's basically, it's going to be, as we look at the different pieces that we have, we're one of the fastest growing companies in Oregon. And also we have published people over 280,000 books on Office 365 and migrate over 100,000 users to Office 365. And we're involved a lot in terms of the Department of Defense and cybersecurity and CMMC, and basically just trying to do the things necessary to how to actually protect us and also protect our clients and make sure that everyone can get their job done and just kind of move ahead. So with the changes with the Microsoft Partner Conference, there's two trends that come through. They're shifting the entire platform. By platform, I mean, we're talking about Windows, we're talking about servers, we're talking about Azure in terms of AI, and also in terms of the concept of Copilot. Now, what Microsoft, when you think about AI, says, oh, I'm going to have AI do something and everything else, and it's just going to take care of it. Microsoft's philosophy is AI in terms of the implementation model is like a Copilot, like on the airplane. It's there to help you do your day-to-day job and help you become more efficient. So when you think about the AI implementations of it, it's almost like, people are in control. People are basically putting information in there and trying to get the right pieces in place to make sure that we can do our job better. That's what Copilot is. So as we go through and look at those, keep those two concepts in the back of the mind, the platform shift going to AI, and also in terms of what Copilot really means. So what are the top 10 things? Like, you got to have a top 10 list. we put one together every year. And so let's just go through in terms of what's changing. I'm going to walk through this list for everyone. Windows 11, for instance, there's a better integration that you're going to see with AI. We'll talk a little bit about this. But the big change in terms of what's happening in Microsoft, it's not so much of a change the way 365 works, but it's just a philosophy to really understand it is the privacy of data. And that's a restricted access in the AI engine. So we're going to talk more about that. And what that means for businesses that use 365 is data that's in your 365 tenant is restricted to your company. It's not published in the general community as you would do with like OpenChat AI and some of the other third-party AI products. Bing Chat Enterprise was announced. It's a search engine trying to leverage AI in terms of data mining your tenant for your use in protected mode. The Microsoft Copilot will go through the various products on this. And so you get an idea. The security integration, the tools that we're using, and also how it's actually integrating into the Microsoft security stack. And the big change that we've seen a lot in terms of the Dynamics product and how they're actually integrating the entire Dynamics infrastructure into Copilot for automation. And one of the cool tools that I find, and we'll talk a little bit about this, is with Power Automate. Now, Power Automate is one of those tools that we all look about how do we actually process, how do we do things better, how do we do workflow. This is the no-code tools with a WYSIWYG. You drop the tools in the build process to automate what you're doing. Now, what they came out is something known as process mining to build those process dependency graphs that you actually need to figure out what the tools are actually doing. So if you have tons of them in your organization, it really makes sense. They're Microsoft, or those that have Server 2012, for instance, there's now extending there's extended security updates for an additional 2 years because everyone knows in July 23rd, 2020, Server 2012 R2 basically expired. So you can actually get additional server updates through Azure Arc. The other key things is Surface laptops, for instance. That's going to be the early deployment for AI integration to hardware. That's right. There's hardware known as NPU units that are going to be pushed out into new Surface laptops for AI integration for transaction. And also with one of the products they're announcing is a Microsoft 365 archive and backup. And so there's going to be additional Microsoft services that will come out later this year in terms of how to back up SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange. And a lot of us use like third-party products to do those things, and now you can do different integration on it. So with that, with our top 10 list, let's go just begin with Windows 11 so we see what's happening. So the real key thing with Windows 11, it's really about better integration. And in terms of how we're actually doing it, Microsoft has really 3 views of the world. You're native on a device, you have a cloud VDI with Azure Visual Desktop, or you're using Windows 365 Cloud PC. And the whole pieces of that is that there's going to, in terms of the Copilot integration, the Copilot integration is not into the Windows 11 platform. It's into the components. It's into Teams. It's into Edge. It's into all the components that make it up. So it's just really a delivery mechanism. And that's kind of interesting. So as you look in terms of happening, there's different rumors going on, what's going to be the next version of Windows and what it's going to actually look like. Well, they kind of hinted a little bit at what that's going to be, but it's going to be AI integration, and we'll see what it's going to be if it's Windows 12 or something else. So the key thing on the Windows environment, it's really targeted about the endpoint integration. And that's what so you have the same endpoint model across, if you're Windows and Azure Virtual Desktop, you have a desktop or a Windows 365 PC. And it's all designed to basically maximize productivity. So no kind of changes there per se, just better integration to Windows 11. And those, if you haven't upgraded from Windows 10 to Windows 11, there's different types of promotion program that they actually have for that. So no real change on it. We're going to expect this something else, but I expect we'll see that and come the November, probably November timeframe this year. The other big discussion, now those that have always known this and been in 365 is, it's data access. The privacy of data in your 365 tenant is basically your company's. And there's we talk jokingly sometimes, we talk about the reason why, like, some third-party cloud services doesn't subscribe to some of the, the US government regulations, because the rumor is they just tap the cable going into the data center anyway, so it's all in clear text. But it's kind of joking in that aspect, but really the whole thing is, and you need to take this to heart, it's about privacy of the data. And when you look in terms of what Microsoft does, their philosophy is that in terms of this, it's secure by design in terms of AI being implemented. The data is your data. The data is not used to train the AI model without your permission. And also with the lace signing that the large companies, the AI companies have signed in OpenAI and the consortium, they basically try to have responsible AI practices. And you look in terms of what this really happens, you have to really keep internalize when you're doing the Microsoft solution, your data is your data. Your data is not used, and I'll repeat this over again, to not use to train or enrich the foundation AI model. So if you actually went out and did a open AI model, for instance, and used ChatGPT, that's all in the public sector. So you're training a third-party model. And you have to basically make sure that when you think about data, it has to be protected at every step. So this was a very theme through all the Inspire. This is the fundamental philosophy of the way Microsoft operates on it. And if you go back in terms of when 365 came up and put in place, and 365 as compared to like third-party cloud services, that's been the philosophy from day one. Microsoft doesn't data mine the customer's tenant. And that's the key aspect in terms of how you actually look at it. And that's their philosophy is moving forward with AI. So how does this really affect in terms of what's going on? Well, let's talk about Bing Chat Enterprise. For those that use Bing, there's two versions of it. There's a Bing commercial and there's a Bing enterprise version. Enterprise version is restricted to your tenant. The commercial version is what's available for in the commercial market. And it's important to have the distinction so you actually really understand the difference of it, is that in terms of Bing Chat Enterprise, the data is confidential. It's user data, the conversation, the chat activity is basically all part of your intellectual property of your company. So it's not when you actually run like Bing Chat Enterprise, for instance, you actually are basically only looking at your internal aspect plus augmenting public information into it, but you're not supplying the company information to the public community. And when you think about the Chat GPT or the Chat AI models, you got to pay really close attention in terms of which AI model you're actually going to use and where it's coming from. That's why you've seen like various things like Amazon doesn't want to have the OpenAI Chat GPT, Google's the same, Apple's the same, because basically you're training the third-party engines. And that's the whole, and if you look in terms of who's going to have the resources to actually go build the AI engines, it's going to be those companies that do 10 to 20 billion a year in terms of revenue. That's in terms of the large language models that actually take it. So what Microsoft did is when they looked at it, you really have in terms of the Copilot, and I didn't get a really good screenshot on this one, so I apologize. But when you look in terms of what you have on in terms of Bing Chat Enterprise, it's the GPT language model across a commercial environment. It's the AI-powered commercial data, but it has the commercial data protection. And when you actually look in terms of Microsoft as they do the Copilot integration to all the Office apps, then basically it's all the integration and privacy to make sure it's compliant. And that's necessary. I'll show you what I mean in a second on that. And you have to think of these three things as terms of what really happened is like the Bing Chat. This is what you get for free. If you won't do the OpenAI Chat GPT, it's the same type thing. It's free, but what free means, you give away your personal information. Whatever you're putting in there is training the AI engine in the public community. Enterprise is targeted for, in this case, it only works with Microsoft 365 plans. So that if you have an MS 365 plans, MS Business Premium, Business Standard, MSC 3 and E5, we'll have the list later. Then basically Bing Chat Enterprise works. And for us, even ourselves, we have implemented Bing Chat Enterprise for our internal use, so that basically doing queries and discussion. It's actually quite fascinating. I'll show you some screenshots of how it works. And then also Copilot. Now the Copilot, as you go through, is one thing they announced is the Copilot's going to be $30 per user. That's going to be the price on it. It's going to show up in terms of the end user market. We expect it's going to be available in December timeframe. We're seeing the early betas. There's an early beta for up to 600 companies right now. And they're going to have a more general beta come about mid-August, the end of August. So right now, the only thing that you can get in terms of the AI engine is this Bing Chat Enterprise or the free AI Chat GPT engines that you have. Now, what does that really mean? Well, here's a screenshot that shows you the difference. This is a regular commercial Bing. I stuck this yellow chat up here. This is not protected. You notice they're basically, I'm signed in with my personal account. Basically, there's no notice of protection, anything else, but I can go query it. Now, if it's a protected account, this is what it looks like. I'm signed in with my work email account. It knocks that it's protected, and then basically there's a protection notice on it. So when you look in terms of organizations of what you're trying to do, you're trying to make sure that if you want to give people the productivity tools they need, but you want to do it in such a way that the information of the company stays within the company. And you can actually do the Chat GPT, and you look, and here's a sample that they actually took some screenshots of the presentation where they're actually building a building. They're trying to put some questions, information about what their specs are, the building, and they do different types of comparison with it. And one of the things they did, they actually had an analysis and say, okay, let's go rewrite this things in terms of a paragraph. Now, the other thing you can do once you have the information in place, and one of the things that they did in the example, he says, okay, now go compare this to other buildings in a particular town and tell me how it compares. And so from a standpoint, you can do this with anything. You can actually do it, let's say that you're, in terms of look at your business, look at the products that you're doing in your business. You want to be able to do the things and say, hey, how do I compare with someone? How does my security programs work? How do the product I produce works? How does this compare to that? Give the analysis. Those are the things that you need to do to basically build it and build pieces. Now, with the protected one, you also got the sweep that you can actually go erase things and remove stuff out of the engine if you need to as well. So it's really fascinating as you kind of look the pieces. So this is what we started to deploy this, and this is really new. It came out last week, so we already have deployed it through our tenant here at KAMIND. Now, the next thing is going to be talking about, it's going to be Microsoft Copilot. Now, to give an idea what Copilot is, I picked up some kind of screenshots that kind of give you a perspective. The way that AI works, you have this large language model. And the large language model is a collection of data, syntax, and algorithms. And to actually build one of these things, you have to be probably a multi-billion-dollar company. It's just large, and the data size is just huge. You're talking petabytes in size. And that's what OpenAI is doing. But when you actually look at the apps has the users with Teams or Words, and then we'll walk through some examples so you can see this, but they do query against Microsoft Graph. And then what happens is part of the process, you're going to also query against the large language model too. So you'll have a perspective of pulling data out. And how this actually works to the end user is when you get your response, this is really what happens. You actually are requesting information. Information's going to the Microsoft Graph. You're requesting information from the large language model, goes back and compares to the graph. It has all the information about, your email addresses, files, meetings, etc., and returns that information to the Microsoft apps. Now you notice that there's a trust boundary here in terms of data, so data is not pushed into the AI engine from the client. And there's also in terms of a protection mechanism to make sure data is actually maintained. So your privacy is maintained. You're not sharing anything between tenants. So it's really just your information. And that's very key to actually think about this. So when you look in terms of how this affects on the apps, all of the Microsoft apps are going to be changing. Now you're going to have and I'll walk through some of these as you see the pieces. So Microsoft, for instance, is now Loop. Loop has an integration tool for different tasks and give you a different flow. That's going to be having Copilot integration on the pieces. And so you can actually go through and deploy Loop in your environment and give better perception. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to relate different information together so you can make better decisions. Fabric is another piece that was announced in terms of the pieces. And what Fabric is, for those that are Powered BI that are doing data analysis, Fabrics actually goes and processes that information, gives you a different way to actually present it, so it's much more seamless. But for most of us that basically are not doing with those tools, it comes down to the thing like doing like Word. Like here's an example of doing like Word and Copilot, where I'm basically adding a bunch of different things associated with it. I'm having go generate the information, then I'm actually going to have it go generate a draft of a document of a product proposal. Those are literally the things that you can do with in terms of Copilot. That's how it's going to affect. Now, think of yourself, and granted that you're going to change the document, but imagine that you're trying to put a product proposal, a different idea put in place, write a new SOP for some process you have. Wouldn't it be nice to pull the raw data together and get a template put together and then modify that template? Just think the amount of business hours that would save and how your productivity would improve. And that's the whole thing when you talk about AI. You're talking in the days of when you do AIs and Copilot, here's an example with an Excel spreadsheets. But you have the same type of thing. You're trying to get information to assist you and trying to help you what you need to do. Now, when you look in terms of how we used to do like search engines for Bing, we'd like, okay, I would want to find like, I do a search for find SOP, talks about building an Azure DC and Azure government, for instance. Now, that would be a search language, and I get all the documents that would match all those terms. When you're doing AI, you're using something as a semantic language. So in essence, you're doing a real natural language interpretation of that. And so the AI engine is going to assist you and actually build in terms of collect the information that you need that's relevant to your queries. And you can see that with the Bing Enterprise Chat. And if you notice, like here, you see the certain, like it's talking about analyzing this quarter. Where would you actually have and go say and search in a search engine, say go analyze this? So you're now having the ability to look at data, correlate information, and see what's going on in the environment. Now, it's not just that. It's also like building like what we're doing here today. You can actually go through and build presentations and based on information. In this case, there's a proposal that we have in this example, and we're building a PowerPoint proposal based on that. And so we can actually have a starting place. So when you think of all these things of a co-pilot, someone to assist you doing work, it's all the same. And then you see, and when you look at like Outlook, for instance, for example, putting together, sending a co-pilot, using it to generate an email to your team, putting together information, building a draft. Those are the type of things that you can actually do to actually help you along the way. Now, with the one thing keep in mind is that the Outlook that you have right now, there's a new Outlook and an old Outlook. The Outlook desktop you have will not work with Copilot. You have to use the new Outlook. So there's a new version of Outlook that is basically available. And those that haven't had it, if you actually look your old Outlook desktop on 365, in the upper left-hand corner, there's a toggle button that you can actually switch to new Outlook, sort of like with Teams. So the big question we're asked a lot of times that people saying that, how do we prepare? Well, on the data governance side, there's a couple of things that really need to do. You got to clean up the data access permissions and SharePoints and Teams to make sure people have the right access permissions for what they're doing. You have to also make sure that if you haven't done and gone down governance and start looking at data classification, these are some classifications that we use at KAMIND. You have to start looking at document classifications as well. If you're using third-party data service, you got to keep in mind that you have to go build an access control list. But it's really looking at the different subscriptions and the pieces that you put in place. Now, in terms of the license support, I have seen 3 different documents, so depending which one you want to believe. One is the Microsoft 365 suites, which includes Microsoft Business Premium, Microsoft Business Standard, Microsoft E3, and Microsoft E5. Another document says just E3 and E5, but I think it's going to be the Microsoft suites. But the key thing, if you're running just Office E3s or the productivity suite without the Microsoft suite, those aren't going to be supported with Copilot. Looking at one of the other things, just to talk about this ACL list, to kind of clarify what that looks like, you have this thing known as an external data connector. So when you actually connect an external data source, you're going to actually roll it through Microsoft Graph, and that's going to extend the 365 experience. So if you're actually using a third-party tool that's doing document collection, for instance, and you want to make that information available so it can actually access through Copilot, there's a connector that has to be put in place to do the integration. So or your ERP system, for instance, the same type of thing. So that's going to be the route for that. In terms of pricing that they actually have it, it's basically going to be roughly $30 a user, and it's also going to be on all Android, Mac, iOS, and web apps, but Outlook requires the new Outlook. It will not work on the old Outlook, so keep that in mind. So the other change they did is what I call number 5, was the 5 big one, is the security changes. Now, the security changes is really kind of fascinating because basically Microsoft is really in the world class in terms of the security solutions that they actually have. And so what they've done with Copilot is they basically talking about how you actually integrate the different environments. And for us, we have a product that we'll be announcing in August this year called Guard Plus, which is leveraging off the Copilot that we use for our security customers, that we can actually turn around and build a custom implementation of a security based on your risk profile. So, and we're using very similar in terms of what Microsoft is doing in terms of just one level on top of in terms of the Microsoft generic information security. But it's basically about how to actually defend in machine speed, but also doing skills. One of the things that they have, and I apologize for the screenshot. Let me just brighten up for you real quick. And in terms of what they have, is this was an example of there was a alert that came in through the system and do a quick analyze it. And in terms of analyzing the incident, the Copilot actually goes out and data mines in terms of what's going on, what's suppressing, what's looking in the organization. But the other cool thing they actually do is they'll actually go through and build out a threat graph. And this will give you in terms of what's going down in the incident, what's really happening in terms of the unknown access and everything else. So this really just helps the sales, in terms of the security analyst, make sure it gets right tied into it. And this is what our security team uses, one of the tools. The other change they have, so a bunch of stuff in security that's coming out the tail end of the year, is going to be the Dynamics integration with Copilot. Now, the Dynamics is really kind of fascinating. Well, kind of really fascinating. It's still the same thing. For those that have started using the Power Platform, for instance, where you actually have the Dynamics apps, Power Apps, and everything else, and you do the workflows, you can actually now integrate those. And with the Dynamics portal, what's kind of fascinating is that it's all drag and drop. It's all no code generation. So you get a GUI and you just drag the pieces and build it in. So if you're looking at trying to move like a group of documents from one area to another, you use the Power Tools to actually do those type of things. Now, what Microsoft has done is basically they're integrating Copilot into all the Dynamics products to actually give that AI engine to basically the ability so you can actually do the job faster. Now, when you talk about Dynamics, it's kind of interesting as you look at the different products. You're talking in terms of what's happening on the CRM. You're talking what's happening in terms of the way you do work, in terms of how you answer customers. It talks about how you're actually doing in terms of reducing costs and cost analysis, or how you actually are looking at even the whole workflow environments. They implemented dynamics across the entire AI across the entire environment. And this is kind of interesting. Stepping back and looking at Microsoft, Microsoft did a fundamental shift in the company this past year. And this announcement is they're basically implementing AI in everything. That's how it's being done, and that's how they're actually looking at it, and that's how they're actually looking in terms of how to drive the organization on the pieces. Now you look in terms of other things that you have in terms of the Copilot, just an idea, it's in Viva Sales, it's in the customer insights and the marketing programs, Business Central, supply chain management. So if you actually are building something, now you have the ability to actually integrate the supply chain into Dynamics and actually be able to forecast things. And that's the change that everything's going, is looking at data, for instance. Like here's an example of using Dynamics marketing, doing a customization of trying to have it go build for you a customization of, based on a set of terms, and this is what it would come based on your colors and everything else. You have a similar things in terms of supply chain. You have a bunch of invoices that are there. You're basically looking in terms of what's going on, who you should contact. So you in essence have this assistant that's going to be helping you in terms of the day-to-day activity. So it's kind of fascinating, the pieces. And like even for ourselves, we step back and looked at our business and say, what do we need to do? Do we have the right people in place? Do we have the right skills in place? What types of things we need to do to basically take our business and take our departments and organizations to the next level? Now, the one I find that really like is this Power Automate with process mining. I think this is really cool. And we use Power Automate to a little bit in terms of KAMIND, in terms of some of our pieces. We use Power Automate, some of the capabilities in terms of our license portal. But what this really comes down to is you start getting process graphs. And one of the big issues associated with when you do a process and you do like tools, you lose control or ability to actually view what's going on into the organization. And what you want to actually be able to do is say, go reach down and go expand these things in detail and figure out how the organization looks. So you get this view of a process view. Now, when you start using the process mining, then you can actually start tracking in terms of real time what's really going on in terms of the organization. So you can actually see in details and try to draft what's happened to the PO. If you issued a PO, did the PO get actually processed? How is it being handled? So you're seeing the entire business workflow in the organization. And in looking at the pieces of it, you actually have, you can actually generate these things through Power Automate. So you start generating no code process diagrams. So the piece that was always missing on the no code process diagrams was the ability to analyze what you built. And that's the whole thing, because when you're trying to look at, especially the days when we're limited with the resources we have, we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we actually improve things? How do we actually reduce cost? How do we actually scale the business? And this is really super important at this time when we actually fear of going to recession, or we have this thing about we're basically not sure in customers. We want to try to make sure we have the revenue streams in place. Process automation and process analysis is key. And that's when you want to really look at it. And so these are really kind of a really strategic tools. And you have to step back and think from an organization, how can I fundamentally change my organization to advance to the next level? Now, the other change that we have, Microsoft, a little bit different. Everyone remembers when they had the server 2008 R2, it was very difficult to get extended updates and everything else. Microsoft changed that. They kind of listened to folks, which I'm happy about. So if you have an old servers 2012 R2, you all have a model in terms of how you can actually use Azure Arc. It doesn't mean you have to migrate the servers to Azure like you had with 2008 R2. You can still leave them on-prem, but you're going to use Azure Arc to actually manage the environment. So in essence, you can get extended server updates for a good 2 years in your environment, which is really going to be helpful. because remember, most people don't realize that on 7/23/23, that's when server 2012 R2 server updates are no longer valid. So that means you're out of compliance. And there's a new WYSI Azure Arc tool that you can get access to and basically go through and extend the extended server updates and have it build against your CSP subscription. And then if you don't use it, it's all variable. So it's when you use it and plan for the migration out, then basically you don't need to cancel the service. So it's actually pretty good. I think this is a very positive change that Microsoft did. Now, the other one that we've seen is with the AI integration to chipsets on laptops. So this is kind of fascinating because what's happening is like we use Surfaces ourselves. And as you go with the next generation Surfaces, as you go with AI is being integrated into the chipset. And Microsoft and Intel are actually working together to make sure that the Surface laptops are basically Surface devices are going to be the early devices that for adoption of what the new experience is going to be. And you look in terms of what Surface and AI does for the devices, smoother, faster, more secure, and we use them because we can actually, when we talk about security, it has the ones we have the next generation security components in them, and that we can actually lock them down in the environments, and it's actually better and easier to manage it. Now, what's happened, which I found was fascinating, is they built basically there's this thing called an MPU, and I'm not quite sure what their name. To me, it's like a network processing unit, but I think this is a different. MPU stands for something different in terms of AI logic name, so I'll have to go look that up. But it's basically the new devices coming out are going to have this MPU component with a CPU system on it, and also in terms of Windows and everything else. Now, the other thing that's going to happen, if you see this little thing down on this corner, this is kind of called the CPU with a system on chip. So the OS is being integrated onto the devices itself, and the OS is called Onyx, for instance. So there's going to be a lot of changes as you go through in 24 and 25 in terms of what's happening in the hardware environment. It's all about security. And there's going to be also about how things are developed and how you do things. So it's really kind of driven to, it's like Surface empowers the Windows 11, the Microsoft 365, but it's all this integration that you're going to see that things are going to change. Now, the negative side of this is that you're going to have to start looking at your hardware platforms that you actually have, and you're going to have to say that in 3 years, you're going to have to replace them. Well, and that's going to be, and you're going to have to look at different strategies associated with it. For us at like KAMIND, because for us to meet our GRC, our governance, risk, and compliance requirements, we only have Surface laptops in there because we need to have 100% control of everything on the device. So we really strip down what our ability is and what people can do, and also reduce our risk. So that's keep in mind. Those are things to do. So if you're planning, work with us, and we can help you actually kind of figure out what is the right plan, what is the right waterfall strategy, so you can actually prep yourself and don't get blindsided, because things are going to change really fast in the next 12 to 36 months. The other piece that I'm really kind of happy to see, we'll have more information. I don't have any pricing on this, is Microsoft has now brought off their 365 archive for their backup. They have backup archive for SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange. So this is a little bit different. The archive is cold storage, where backup is hot storage. We use a lot of third-party products, like in the government side, we use AviPoint. On the commercial side, we use Axient. And what's nice about this is now you can get to a standard backup across both environments. And you can, for us, it can reduce the amount of training time for folks and everything else. I don't have much information about this, but gives you an idea of what it's going to actually look like when it's actually pushed out. And you should see this sometime in Q4. I just also don't have pricing on this as well. So that's kind of the big highlights and everything else that we actually see. The real question that you ask is, how do you get started? And how do you actually prepare yourself? And I think the recommendations we have, there's a couple of different ways, but The real solution, what I would actually strongly recommend people to look at, is basically go look in terms of getting yourself established with Bing Chat in your environment, the enterprise version. It's basically, there's no cost to it. It's free. There's some configuration that you need to do in your tenant, and the cost of configuration for us to do it is probably less than $500 to do the configuration for you. But it's really is pretty straightforward. That's what you want, and get your people trained on using the Chat GPT engine where you control the information, and that's the key thing. Because if you actually use a different one, or if you use a Google one, or if you're going to use I'm sure Amazon will have one as well, and there'll be probably Apple is talking about having their own version. But if you start doing different things, you want to control the information, you want to read the license agreement associated with it. Everyone wants to play with OpenAI. The problem with the OpenAI one is unless you actually pay for it, there's restrictions on it, and there's basically you're training the general purpose in AI engine. Because keep in mind, OpenAI is a nonprofit corporation. That's what it's set up for. So it's set up for to help generate and build the rest of the environment. Okay, so what should you do next? Well, it's really three things. You gotta build out your security to protect data for user access. That's a given. As I look through the things, we're going to get early access to stuff in probably mid-August, and we're putting together programs and everything, so you can actually figure out if this is something you're interested in. How do you actually get on our deployment list for AI schedule on the deployment? If you're not using, you got to look at your license mix. You're going to have to look at either getting a couple MS365 E3 and E5s. Business Premium works right now, but we'll see what happens. And I would actually seriously go deploy Bing Enterprise to restrict data leakage in your environment and train the people on what you want. Now, the key thing when you start deploying these tools, you basically have to go through the environment and say that, okay, how do you actually want to manage the environment? Do you use Intune and Autopilot to kind of restrict access and control what's on devices? So you kind of direct your users into the device you use so you can maintain data, because that's a piece is what happened. But yeah, so give us a call and everything else. And if you want more information on our Loop and Fabric, we have published just some blogs on that as well. And with that, I'm going to give it to you, Mike.
Thank you, Matt. A lot of new information there. Appreciate it. So what I tell people is of last week, the Microsoft AI dam basically broke. So, I mean, we're just, at the very tip of the AI iceberg, if you will. You're going to see so much information streaming out in the next 12 months. And, this is just the start. I think it's going to be really cool to see what all the independent software vendors come out with, as far as integrating AI into their software. That should be really fun to see. But a lot of new information. Barb, I did see your chat there. So your question was, is Bing Chat Enterprise additional cost? The answer is no, as long as you're using the Microsoft Business Premium, the Microsoft 365 E3, or Microsoft 365 E5. So if you're on a lower, maybe one of the old Office suite packages, you might want to think about upgrading, which would be a good idea anyways, because you're going to get a lot more security integrated into the Microsoft 365 suites. So, it's maybe time to pull the trigger on that. And then Mr. Kress, thank you, NPU, Neutral Processing Unit.
It's a neural processing unit.
Okay, I misread that, sorry. So we'd like to open it up to Q&A. I mean, if you want to unmute and ask away, feel free. If you want to drop a question into the chat, feel free.
I'll add some things. So as you look through pieces, there's, two types of tenants in the world. There's a commercial tenant and a government tenant. The government tenant is typically about 180 days behind. So you'll see all this stuff that we're talking about here. It appears in the commercial side, and it's going to be appearing in the government side. And so as you go in GCC high or in that environment, so it's all about trying to figure out how to train people and do things. So it's, and I find it kind of what I find from, supplying security services in both sides. It's nice to basically have one environment that I can train the same skill sets on both sides for folks. And it really kind of makes sure you can get experts and, system matter experts.
Matt,
Yeah.
question for Matt. Can you just talk a little bit more about some changes you're going to see in your company to help service this model for us? Because security is one thing and deployment of hardware, but looks like this training and development to kind of advance skills is something that's going to be required. And if you're going to head down that path, could you just elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, if you look for like all our CSP customer, we're big on training. And when you sign up with a CSP agreement for us, originally we used Brainstorm, then we went to clip training in terms of we just give clip training, which is out is for Teams training free to anyone. As you look in terms of what we're seeing with and why we're so interested in terms of enterprise chat, if you have not used the Chat GPT in terms of trying to solve problems, I mean, it's to the point that you can actually go through and say, okay, if you're an engineer, here's a query of PowerShell I want to run it through the enterprise Chat GPT, and suddenly it will actually build and correct the syntax for you so you can actually run the commands. Are seeing a lot of things in terms of, and that's changing the way we work. And what we expect in terms of a lot of the client base is we see a lot of clients now when they actually going through looking for service issues, they may actually use enterprise chat and just plop it in there and see what it says, that how to handle it. Because in the Microsoft space, one of the things that Microsoft is doing, they're opening up their technical support documents to be accessed from the enterprise chats. So if you're in the doing, you can actually get the information, a lot of things associated with it. So with that, you're looking at saying, okay, now what skills do we actually have? So the skills we're running from and we always had, since a lot of our customers have their own IT environment, we always were dealing with tier 2 and tier 3. That's the type of things that we're looking at. It's more the complex things as you put in place and trying to develop the skills and the training. That's what we're doing actively. We actually we changed the way we do compensation this past year to incentivize our employees for certification much more than we ever had in the past. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. The other piece is going to be compliance, and that's going to be the other head, because security is the tools to do things, and compliance is the proof that you actually did what you're saying. And compliance becoming more and more apparent as the needs go forward in the commercial and the government side. So that's the change. Is going to be a lot of education on compliance, a lot of education in terms of how to actually use the tools to basically up your skill set, and basically give me exposures to think outside the box and how to fix problems.
Great question, Ernie. Thanks for the question. I see Steve has a question in the chat here. He's talking about rolling laptop upgrades. So personally, I sat in on the session between Intel and Microsoft last week. And if it were me, I'd probably hold off on any kind of laptop purchases for a while, because the newer generation of laptops, the motherboards, they're basically going to have 3 processors on there. You're going to have your CPU processor, your graphics or GPU processor, and then, I've heard it referred to 2 different things now. One, the NPU, and then the AI processor. So you're going to have 3 different microprocessors on there doing 3 different activities. And what's in stock today in the channel, I guarantee it doesn't have the new NPU microprocessor on there yet. So, you might want to hold off of, integrating AI is in your future roadmap. But those should be out Q4 early next year for sure.
Yeah, and also just what I stuck on the screenshot, this is known as the Onyx runtime. So in essence, CPUs are not going to have a OS on the chip. So they're going to a higher level than just microcode and everything else that you run into on the CPUs now. So as there's a tighter security model in place, there's a higher level that you actually have in terms of what the application runs in the device. So there's going to be some significant shift that happens. This is so just be careful in terms of what your schedule is and how you plan for stuff.
So really, as Matt mentioned, the first step is to get your Bing Chat Enterprise rolled out. You do want to put some security parameters on there. If you need help, we can certainly help you with that. It's not that expensive, just a couple hours with the engineering, and we can wrap up your security parameters for you. And then you can get out there and start playing with a secure AI platform. And you're also going to hear sometimes with AI, it referred to as generative. So what's that mean? It means it integrates language, voice, video, and pictures. So, it does everything basically. It can put together some really fancy reports. It's going to be able to summarize maybe a meeting you had in Teams and put together, action items, to-dos, follow-ups, all that kind of fun stuff. So again, we're just at the tip of all this. We're going to have a bunch more KAMIND webinars coming up on AI and next steps and how to help you just become a little bit smarter, quicker, and better at your job. Using AI is really your co-pilot. Any other questions or I see another chat here. For Office that are multi-platform, God, I can't read that.
Yeah, the question is for offices that are multi-platform, what does the story look like for the Apple Mac with respect to the upcoming Windows hardware changes? I mean, that's going to be an interesting question. It's I'll give you my my own humble opinion version. It's in Microsoft best interest to make sure Mac platforms are supported because it's not Microsoft really doesn't want to have a one vendor to be a monopoly over one vendor because that creates other issues with FTC. So my guess on this is that they're going to have support on it. The question is going to be really what is Apple doing with their GPT and how does it put in place? Because a lot of what Microsoft is doing is working with Intel. As you're aware, Apple went to their own chipset now, and then no longer have Microsoft chipsets on their motherboards. So there's a disconnect, and we'll see what happens. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I think short term, there's not going to be an issue. They'll try to make compatibility. Long term, I think it's best. Let's see what's going to be announced at Inspire next year, and you'll probably have the answer for that.
Great question. Thanks, Lauren. Any other questions? Please feel free to fire away.
The other thing too, if you're looking at if you're looking at hardware purchases for your environments like laptops and desktops and things like that, is keep in mind of how long do you want to keep them around. There's going to be a lot of deals for hardware, I guess, in the next 6 months as the new chipsets go out. So just keep in mind that if what's going to be the life cycle of that hardware. It may make economic sense to purchase it to do a 2 or 3 year purchase and basically lock them in, but knowing that you're probably going to replace them in 3 years. The key thing is the plan that you're going to have to replace hardware to 3 years to new generations in 2 to 3 years. So it's kind of see what you have, see what makes sense, the move. But beware of a deal that looks too good because people are dumping stuff. They're going to be dumping things fast for the new boards.
All right. Any other questions? All right, not seeing really anything more in the chat. And I'm not hearing anybody. Last chance, if you have any questions. All right, like I said, this is, just the beginning. I mean, we're just going to be talking about AI for, years to come at this point, and all the new integration and how it works and tools and everything else. So it's really very exciting. And we look forward to, helping to educate you and how to deal with this new technology and get the best of it. Matt, any closing comments?
Yeah, I would seriously, if you haven't contacted us, please reach out about getting Bing Enterprise enabled and installed in your environment. The best way to start is start now, and understand what you actually have, and get the process rolling, because this is not something you're going to be able to stop. It's just basically, it's accepting this is the way things are going to move to, and how do you actually build your environment so it's AI friendly and the information's controlled.
Well, we really appreciate you guys' time today and joining us. Please pay attention for future KAMIND webinars upcoming. I know we're going to have quite a few on AI, and we look forward to seeing you again and bringing you the newest, latest, greatest information. Again, thanks for your time and have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.